Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Connected by Community, a podcast brought to you by Ballantine Capital Advisors. We're fortunate here today to have a repeat guest and something that's timely with the spring season coming upon us, and that's to talk about home mortgages and home loans. And we have Amanda McCall from PrimeLending. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
And you know, there's not many people that have been here 2 times, so
I'm
you're an
thrilled.
exclusive club. And we were talking a little bit before, and certainly I've known you a long time, and I know you've been in the community doing a lot of good things. And we were talking how the environment's vastly different than when you did come on at whatever it was, a year and a half ago. But maybe I need to pause for a second, just for our listeners who didn't hear the last one or don't know you. Maybe just a quick background about your experience of things you've done in your career, so that they know just how much of an expert we're talking about here.
Absolutely. So I am a local mortgage lender. I have been in the industry now for 26 years. So I have...
Started when you were 15, right?
I pretty much, yeah, thanks. Right out of college, didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. Kind of stumbled into this career and have absolutely loved it ever since. So I've seen a lot. I've seen, rates ebb and flow up to, 8% down to what we saw a couple of years ago in like the 3% range. I've seen a tremendous amount of change in the market and how that impacts clients. So really have learned tremendously on educating clients on when is a good time to purchase or to move up or even downsize, and also kind of help them structure pretty much anything that deals with financing, all the way to educating them on student loan education, car loans, things of that nature, and how all of that kind of falls in together with their budget and their mortgage financing.
That's a lot to unpack, and we want to get these folks out of here in a car ride, but we're going to do our best. So let's maybe jump into that. Maybe let's start at that high level. If I'm a young person, maybe I've never had a home, I'm not sure what I need to do, I'm out of college, maybe unfortunately I had to take a little college debt out, I got a car debt, but I'm thinking I want to save for a home purchase. Maybe walk through some of the things that first time, or even, it could even, I guess, technically be a second time homeowner, but in this environment we're in, what do they need to be thinking about as they, even before they contact you or preparing to contact you 6 months out, a year out?
Absolutely. So if you're looking in the future to look to purchase, I would say the biggest obstacle that I see now with customers is car loans. A true car loan can keep a buyer out of a home. And let me give you an example of that. So if you have a car loan and the monthly payment is about $400 a month, that is equivalent to about $100,000 in a mortgage loan. So I see a lot of customers that come in with their dream car and a significant car payment, and that really may be their biggest roadblock into getting into a home loan. And there's a big difference between driving your dream car that is unfortunately a depreciating asset versus purchasing a property that is an appreciating asset. And so really kind of learning that buying that first home is really the stepping stone to start to build wealth, true wealth, and also the stepping stone to get them eventually into their dream home. So kind of first steps I would say is be very aware of your spending on certain things like the car loans, your credit card debt, but also recognizing that you don't have to have perfect credit to get into a home. You don't have to have a 20% down payment. Really finding what that comfort level is on a monthly payment, and then let's start having that conversation of what does that look like in a home loan. Another big thing I advise clients is don't wait. If you're ready to buy, don't wait until rates drop. Buy now. What we're going to see as the market changes, as we get more into spring and summer, we're getting closer to the election. We're probably going to start to see some interest rates improving. As rates go down, demand is going to increase. And as demand increases, the market's going to shift to where these house prices are going to start going up. And by waiting for rates to go down, you may actually have priced yourself out of the market and won't be able to purchase.
All right, so I'm going to pause right there because I think I heard what you said, but I want to make sure our listeners did.
Yes.
What I heard you say was you actually could have a rate reduction. Works a lot like a bond, by the way, but that's a different discussion. A rate reduction on your mortgage, but that drives demand because consumers are going out there buying these things. Now, when you had one or two people competing, maybe we got 10 people back to the old bidding wars, and that $300,000 house is now going to sell for $375,000. And I heard you say, but I want to make sure our listeners heard, that could cost you more in payment because now I'm paying $375,000, but I saved a quarter point.
Correct. Absolutely.
So it's important to know, especially in your local market, I'm not a realtor, but prices in this local market in the upstate of South Carolina have been what? Strong, weak, and even in weak markets have tended to go up, right? So maybe you could speak to that. So I just wanted to kind of clearly make sure people heard that. And so maybe talk about, even in tough markets, how we've been as an economy in the upstate of South Carolina.
Absolutely. Even in times of '09, when we saw the big housing bubble burst, we were still seeing appreciation in our market. So we were still seeing anywhere from 1% to 2% appreciation when across the country they were seeing a depreciating economy. So now what we've seen on average, we're going to see anywhere from, on the low side, 3% of appreciation all the way up to 8% of an appreciation. So we are talking significant wealth by owning property. And a lot of times I hear people want to stop and say, well, it's not really my dream home. Well, I personally, I think, have owned 7 homes and not one of them is in my dream home. So it's kind of really stepping back and going, okay, I can continue to rent and help someone else build their own wealth, or I can purchase something and really start building that and gaining that wealth, that appreciation, that equity position. And when you talk about what's going to happen when the demand increases and a $300,000 home now is going to be, you use the example, $375,000, there's so much also that goes into that, because if you purchase now, let's say mortgage rates right now are in the mid 6% range. If you purchase that property now at $300,000, you may also be able to negotiate where the seller helps to give you some incentive money to go towards closing costs, or maybe even some incentive money to buy your rate down. There's going to be more negotiation that the seller is going to be willing to kind of help get you into that home. Versus if we fast forward 6 months, a year down the road, rates have dropped, and now you want to get into that market. Now you're paying $375,000 for that home, which probably is going to be even over the asking price. So there's no seller incentive that you can negotiate. Yes, your rate's lower. But if you would have compared that to if you purchased at the 6.5% at $300,000, rates drop, give me a call back. We can do a refinance, get the rate down. That's going to cost between $3,000 and $5,000 to refinance versus, in this example, $75,000. That's going to cost more. So I think really kind of stepping back and not getting so hyper-focused on the interest rate, but really stepping back of this is a long-term, we're talking 30-year mortgages. So these are long-term loans. These are long-term decisions that you don't need to make a snap decision because of where the rate is, because that's not really what the focus is. We can always refinance. You could never buy that home again for that price of where it is today.
And I'm curious, in your experience, is that partly driven by the news media focus on the rate? Because as you and I know, there's lots of components in buying. You have rate, you have down payment, you have repairs, you have closing costs, you have all these various and sundry things. And you have to take a step back and look at the total picture, not just today, how long you're going to be there, what you would have paid in rent. In other words, it's really a wealth decision. But do you see that focus by maybe just news articles and hyper media sensation?
Oh, tremendously. And what's unfortunate too is typically when the media reports on something, they are late, they're behind. So if you're hearing on the news, oh, well, rates dropped, that may have happened 2 days ago or so before it's kind of filtering down and what we're seeing in the market. Interest rates, they are constantly moving, just like the stock market. So our rates may become available at 10 o'clock in the morning, but they may change 3 or 4 times during the day, depending on any volatility that we're seeing. So it truly is such a fluid, moving thing, and it can take one comment that the Federal Reserve makes that can really take a tailspin into the interest rates. So it's really, if you start getting really hyper focused on that, on those mortgage rates, it really can be overwhelming to try to step into the market.
Yeah. Kind of before we move on from the young buyer, one of the things I like that you said, be careful on the cars. We say that as well. If you hadn't been able to pay cash, we would tell people to try to pay cash for cars, but if not, get those under control, because it's going to be hard probably to have 2 BMWs in the driveway and buy your first house for most people.
Absolutely.
And I completely concur. And I think the other thing, especially if I think a lot of people need this, but certainly if it's your first purchase, you need to have a professional on your side to help you, because there's a lot of areas you can go awry. And I'm sure there's a lot of online lenders that tout certain things, but maybe I think people need to be careful of that. I'm sure you've held people's hand through many things and gotten them to the end, and you've seen where maybe if they didn't have the technical resources and skills to navigate to the end, it can matter in the end.
Oh, completely. Absolutely. Because it truly is. And when I started this, I talk that I'm local, and that's a huge, huge thing, because I am here on the ground in the area. So not only do I probably know the neighborhood you're buying in, I'm probably going to know people that live in the neighborhood. I'm going to know what school the children may be going to. I'm going to have this deep-rooted connection here. And so I have this true passion to make sure that everything goes smoothly. My goal is to become your lifelong lender. I don't look at this as a transaction, which is what online lenders are looking at. They're in a cubicle with probably very little experience. They are looking at it more as a paycheck, unfortunately, than this is my career. This is my livelihood. This is my reputation.
Yep.
So it makes a huge difference.
And it does, especially if, you're counting on it to make a lifetime thing to happen, or it could be even a 5-year commitment, or it's your retirement home. Mm-hmm. So it's a big deal, and people get really emotional about it. And if you don't make that planning in advance and you've not partnered with the right person, it can matter. Let's maybe talk about that. So we kind of talked about that first-time home buyer. I, like you've moved a few times, and I agree with you. There's no such thing as a dream home. Sorry, kids, if you believe there is. I would agree with Amanda there. There's always something homes are just items that we live in. They're great. We make memories, but there's always something we probably want to improve on. So the reality is we may move at some point in time. And so let's talk about that third, fourth, fifth home someone might buy, or what I see a lot in my client base, the retiree. We see a lot. Hey, I'm getting older. And they say stuff like, I want everything master on Main, or I want everything on Main, right? I want a single story. And I'm willing to even take a mortgage on for that. Or it's, I've worked really hard. I want some nice stuff. I don't have to have 5,000 square feet, but I'd like 2,800 of really nice square feet, right? So in that, maybe they're spending a few bucks. Maybe they're going from the $400,000 house to the $900,000 house. And they're going to need a bigger mortgage, right? Maybe if they're retired, they don't have the normal income streams that they would. So maybe speak a little bit to that buyer and the differences they have to think about in a bigger loan, and maybe different sources of income than the first-time homeowner.
Definitely. So we start looking at in that situation where they're going to have more assets typically. So they're probably going to be pulling less income. They may be on a fixed income of Social Security or a pension, but they have a tremendous amount of assets that they have invested at Ballantine Capital, or that they're going to be pulling from the home that they're selling. So we can really leverage that a little bit differently. So it depends on what their goals are. A lot of times it is still beneficial for a buyer to still hold a mortgage, because it is really one of the last things that a client can deduct on their income taxes. So sometimes having that mortgage interest deduction is really something that they need on a tax standpoint. So if we're looking at needing to do a mortgage, but they're on a fixed income, then a lot of times what we'll do is we'll set them up on a monthly distribution from their asset accounts. So if they have an invested account, an IRA, we can set them up to where they are being distributed a certain amount per month, and then I can then use that as income to help them qualify. So there's a lot of different things. I know you and I have done that a couple times with several of your clients. It gets them the ability to get into that property, comfortably be able to pull the money out to make the payments on that, and really help them step into that, like you said, that retirement home, that dream, that in essence, dream home that they've been looking for.
Yeah, so the thing that's important, I think, there is what you just said. Just because you're retired doesn't mean the lender can't help you out. Mm-hmm. And so work with your lender, your financial advisor, to create a source of income that meets the qualifications. You just have to maybe do it a little bit different, and there's ways around that for sure. So
Definitely.
the other thing that I think that's still out there, and there's a lot in Greenville at least, there's a lot of construction going on, right? And that's a whole nother, but let's briefly at least talk about that. If I'm building a home, a custom home, or I know if I'm building with a production builder, they may have different criteria, but let's say I'm doing a custom home. Are there still construction loans to be had? What do think people need to think about with that? Because that is its own animal and different than these normal things. But we do see it in our client base, people building their dream home or their retirement home, and it's still out there. So maybe speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And it is. It's its own animal. So there are construction loans that are out there. Pretty much what you need to be prepared for is to have at least 20% down. That can be the equity that you own in the land. So let's say that you already own the land. You've sat on it for a couple of years now. You've just been kind of waiting to take this next step. Let's say you own the land free and clear. We can use that as an equity position to go towards that loan to value that we need for the construction loan. Construction loans themselves are a little bit different as well. They're not 30-year fixed rate loans. Those are going to be more interest only during construction, gives the builder some draws, some different distributions per month as construction continues. So we're working with them throughout the entire construction phase. Then once construction is complete, that's when we're going to start talking about the permanent mortgage financing, that long-term financing that they're looking for. So construction loans are a little bit more detailed because it is such a longer process. So yeah, like a little bit more down payment. We're looking for a little bit stronger on the credit scores, a little bit stronger on the asset position.
So it's fair to say if I'm doing a construction loan, I need to have my ducks more in a row. I probably need to be a seasoned investor, and I'm not going to probably walk in and do it on my first loan for most people.
Correct.
Not
Correct.
impossible, certainly doable, but you need to probably work with a professional and have your assets and income in line.
Absolutely. Because not only is the bank there to protect you, but they're also doing a lot of research on that builder as well to ensure that they're financially stable, that they're going to be able to continue to build that home in the timely manner that we need, pay their subcontractors, things of that nature. Now, this is a construction loan. This is true like you're building your own custom home. If they ended up looking at more of a production builder where a large builder owns the entire neighborhood, you go to their model, you pick out their floor plan, they build it for you, that type of construction is treated just as if it was a resale home. So that's very
Gotcha.
different.
So maybe let's jump, that kind of gives us different, we talked about younger buyers and maybe seasoned buyers and construction, but maybe let's talk about the products that are out there, right? Since we last had the opportunity to sit down on our podcast, I don't know if there's been new things that have come on the market. Certainly rates have changed a lot. 2 years ago, everybody would have just plopped down, done a 30-year mortgage because it was basically free, right? Or so cheap, it's ridiculous. But we live in a different rate environment and cost environment with potentially rates coming down. We don't know. So what are some things you're seeing going on in the market, maybe even some things PrimeLending's doing to help mitigate that or offer clients and things people ought to ask if they're not asking that they didn't need to worry about 2 years? Can you maybe just kind of talk about that?
Yeah. Product-wise themselves, we're still looking at the same kind of product pool that's always been out there. There's going to be some creative things that are there as far as bank statement programs that can help alleviate some needs of self-employed buyers. But when we're talking about just the standard, typical buyer, the biggest thing that has changed and the terminology that I started using again this year that I have not used in years are temporary buy downs. And this is where we can temporarily reduce the interest rate for the first 1, 2, or 3 years of the mortgage loan. So think of it almost as a stair step. So let's say that you were able to negotiate on that $300,000 loan for the seller to contribute $7,000 in closing cost. A creative way to use that $7,000 is for us to buy down that interest rate for, let's say, the first 2 years. So if the interest rate is 6.5% on a 30-year fixed mortgage, we actually can start out for the first year at 4.5%, year 2, 5.5%, and then years 3 through 30, 6.5%. So we're using the seller's money to buy that rate down for the first 2 years, which is going to help alleviate some of that mortgage payment for the buyer. But it also gives them that comfort of slowly stepping into something, especially if they're coming out of rent or if this is a move up, so the mortgage payment's already increasing. And it also gets us to where we really do feel we're going to be in an environment within the next 18 months to refinance. So they may ultimately never get to that 6.5% rate, either by selling the property or by doing a refinance.
So these are 30-year mortgages, but the first year or two or three have a lower rate that let them kind of play the waiting game to hopefully the market conditions improve and or their finances improve.
Absolutely.
That's pretty cool.
Which is great, especially if you have maybe a child that's finishing college. So, that's a large expense that's getting ready to come off, per se, the payroll. Or if you're looking at a raise or promotion, a commission type position, there's lots of different things that this is going to benefit. But these are things that we really weren't talking about 2 or 3 years ago. So these are huge things that I would say over 50% of the clients right now are taking advantage of.
Really? So is that technically, that's not an ARM, it's just a temporary buy down. An ARM's different. We can talk
Correct.
about that. It's just a traditional lot mortgage that has a buy down provision at the beginning. Cool. Well, that's something I think that people ought to certainly talk to you about and consider given the environment that's going on.
Absolutely. And it takes, again, that focus off the rate as much, and it's
Right.
giving them some alleviation of that mortgage payment for the first few years.
And I'm assuming that the buyer, though, still needs to qualify for the full rate, full mortgage, because the lender is going to say you need to be able to float that whole thing.
Correct.
So it's almost a comfort level, but you're going to financially have to be able to float the whole deal.
Absolutely.
For qualification
It's not
purposes.
going to help you afford for a larger home. It's just giving you that benefit of the reduced mortgage for the first few years of the loan.
Right. Excellent. Excellent. So maybe then briefly at least talk about ARMs. Are those being used? How are they being used? At different rate times they have historically been used, and maybe even just briefly for our listeners who aren't familiar, what exactly are they in a quick nutshell, and why might one consider that?
Absolutely. So an ARM stands for adjustable rate mortgage. So instead of your loan being fixed for 15 years or 30 years, we're only going to fix the rate for the first 3, 5, 7, or 10 years of the loan. So it's still a 30-year mortgage, but we're guaranteeing that rate to stay fixed for a shorter period of time. Those are extremely attractive in certain markets. Currently, the adjustable rate mortgages are about where the fixed rate product is. And that's just because of what all is going on with the 10-year T-bill and things in the market. The adjustable rate mortgages have been hit very hard. So we're really not looking at ARMs right now in the market that we're in.
So it just ebbs and flows with the market.
Absolutely.
And you said something that I did want to bring up, so I thank you for reminding me. When people want to know what really affects mortgages, it's really usually the 10-year Treasury, right?
It is,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah.
So when people say, what are rates doing? It's not necessarily prime rate, right? So people get hung up on that prime rate thing. That
Correct.
might affect their home equity line of credit. But when we're talking traditional mortgages, it's more the 10-year Treasury.
Absolutely. And what I'll tell my customers is, because they're like, what website can I go to find out information? Honestly, just listen to the news at night. Typically, not always, but typically the bond market, which is what's going to be more indicative of what's happening with the mortgage rates, the bond market is going to move opposite of the stock market. So if the stock market had a horrible day, that typically means that we saw an improvement in the mortgage rates because people were moving their funds out of the stock market and putting them into the bond market, bringing our rates down, and vice versa. If the stock market had a wonderful day, typically that means that rates worsened a little bit. So we typically move opposite of the stock market.
Gotcha. So do you want me to ask you the proverbial question everyone asks you? I know, when are rates coming down, right? We don't know, right?
We don't know. Last quarter, the quarter of last year, we saw a significant improvement in interest rates. We started to see, I should back up a little bit to say why. Why did we see that? And the reason that we saw that is because the Federal Reserve really started to say that we're going to have to start decreasing prime up to 6, maybe even 8 times in 2024. That gave a tremendous amount of consumer confidence that we were coming out of this. We were going to start to see inflation come down. So we started to see the mortgage interest rates drop from the 7 to 7.5% rate all the way down. Some clients were getting in the upper 5s. So that was the last quarter of 2023. Then since the beginning of this year, 2024, the Federal Reserve has kind of backed up on some of that. Inflation has not decreased like they were anticipating. It hasn't really slackened off. They really have started to say, well, we're really not going to decrease prime as much as we thought. We're not even going to possibly do it at the end of the first quarter. We're probably going to wait until the second quarter of the year. So now we're starting to see interest rates kind of ebb back up a little bit. So I really do feel that we're not going to see rates really drop until we get fully into 2025. I think we're going to see a lot of movement as we get closer to the election, but I think it's just going to be that, some pretty volatile movement. And then once we get whatever goes through the election, once we get into next year, I think that's when we're going to start to see the possibility of these rates coming back down. Forecasters are predicting that they should end up in that mid 5% range on a 30-year fixed mortgage.
About 25. Mm-hmm. And of course, we never know. And it kind of goes back to our conversation before. You have to be careful, especially in a strong real estate market like the upstate of South Carolina. Don't let the house price and appreciation be what catches you because you were waiting for a quarter point drop in a rate.
Correct.
And with this new news of the program of the buy down, I think that's great. Use that to your negotiating power. There still are some areas where you can find affordable housing. Mm-hmm. Still compared to other areas of the country, we're still somewhat reasonable. I know this has become a popular area for a lot of folks to move, although I do joke and tell my friends we're full.
We're over. I think we're over full.
So any other programs or unique things that you can think of that we haven't talked about that people might want to know that exist that they need to consider as they think about financing their biggest purchase?
Yeah, absolutely. So a really great program that South Carolina offers is some down payment assistance. So this is going to be really, really good for buyers that are stepping into their first home and maybe don't have enough for a down payment and closing cost. These are going to be great for your police officers, your EMS, your paramedics, a lot of those hands-on healthcare workers. So South Carolina offers up to $8,000 that they can be given as a grant that is 0% interest rate, does not have to be paid back if they stay in the home 15 years or beyond. So they can take that $8,000, use it as a down payment. Let's say that they sell the home before 15 years. When they go to sell the home, they're going to pay off the first mortgage with me and the $8,000 with the state. So no interest accrues. So it's a really great program that a lot of lenders, especially online lenders, don't know because they don't live here locally to know all that's available to South Carolina residents. But it's a wonderful program that does kind of help those first-time home buyers, those buyers in that moderate to lower income bracket.
That's awesome. I did not know about that. So lesson learned. So cool. Well, thank you for joining us today. And I guess we have a question. We asked it before, but I'm going to ask it again. What makes you tick?
Oh, that's a good question. Really, I would say helping buyers, helping people. And I would even go beyond that. It really is letting my children see that I can be a successful, full-time working parent and still be 100% present with everything that they've done as well. So just kind of showing them that, all right, this really, you can have it all kind of thing. So I would say that's probably what makes me tick.
That's awesome. And I've had the pleasure to know you for a long time and know you're a pro and you're a good mom and do all those things. So I can personally attest to that. And
thanks.
Thank you for being an example for our community and all you do. So I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I love it.
So if people wanted to find you, they wanted to learn more about a loan or just help them become educated on what to do next, how could they reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say the easiest way to find me is going to be my website, which is AmandaMcCallHomeLoans.com.
Thanks, Amanda.
You're welcome.
Thank you all for joining this edition of Connected by Community. Until we see you next time, go out and make our community great.